She saved for 7 months. 7 months of skipped lunches, frozen dinners, overtime shifts that left her feet aching and her eyes burning. All for one moment, one gift, one emerald handbag behind that cold glass case. And then a woman with a polished smile looked her up and down, slowly, deliberately, and said the words that stopped the entire room cold, words that were meant to make her disappear. But what that woman never saw coming was the man standing 3 feet away, the one with dragon tattoos crawling up his neck, the one who never forgot what silence costs. Stay with me until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Amara Brooks decided to buy the handbag, it was raining, not the gentle kind of rain that softens the city and makes people feel poetic. This was New York rain, cold, sideways, unforgiving, the kind that found every gap in your coat and soaked through to your skin before you'd made it half a block. She stood at the crosswalk on Fifth Avenue with her umbrella turned half inside out and her good shoes already ruined, and she thought about turning back. Thought about it seriously, thought about the warm apartment, the leftover rice on the stove, the quiet Saturday morning she could have had instead. But she had been turning back for 34 years. So she pulled the umbrella down, let the rain hit her face, and kept walking. Her name was Amara Celeste Brooks, and she was 34 years old, 5'4", 220 pounds, with a face that strangers called striking when they were trying to be kind and called intense when they weren't. She had natural hair she'd been growing for 6 years, skin the color of dark mahogany, and a body she had spent most of her adult life being told was the wrong size. She was a personal stylist with a client list that had taken her 11 years to build, not because she lacked talent, but because the industry she worked in had never quite decided what to do with a woman who looked like her. She had learned to dress herself in armor every morning, armor that looked like confidence, even when the woman wearing it was running on 4 hours of sleep and a very small amount of faith. The money for the handbag was in her savings account. She had transferred it that morning, and the action felt oddly ceremonial, like sealing something. 7 months of putting away $200 at a time, sometimes $150 when a client canceled or the subway had eaten her MetroCard again. The handbag cost $1,400. She had put away $1,460 because she'd read online that the city tax would get her if she wasn't careful. She had done the math. She had been careful. Her mother's name was Diane Brooks, and she was 58 years old and had been widowed for 3 years, and she did not consider herself a woman who wanted things. That was the precise reason Amara had noticed it. The way her mother had paused at that magazine, the one Amara had brought over on a Sunday afternoon without thinking, and how Diane's fingers had moved to the corner of that one page, not quite touching the photograph of the emerald handbag, but close. The way her eyes had stayed there a beat too long before she turned the page and said something about the weather. Diane Brooks did not buy herself things, had not bought herself things for 3 years since Amara's father passed, and left a gap in the household that no amount of overtime at the nursing home where Diane worked could fill. She gave and gave and gave, to Amara, to her church's food pantry, to neighbors who knocked on her door. And she never complained, and she never asked, and she never paused at magazine pages unless she thought no one was watching. Amara had been watching. So here she was, rain on her face, good shoes ruined, walking toward a boutique she had never entered in her life because women like her did not typically enter boutiques like that one. Not that there was a sign. There was never a sign. The exclusion was architectural, atmospheric. It was in the white marble floors and the crystal lighting and the way the window displays looked less like products for sale and more like exhibits at a museum where you could look, but touching was strongly discouraged. It was in the particular quality of attention the staff gave to certain customers the moment they walked through the door and did not give to others. Amara knew all of this. She had known it since she was 19 and had tried to browse a similar shop on Madison Avenue for a college fashion project, and a sales associate had followed her through 3 rooms before asking if she needed directions somewhere. She had been carrying her school portfolio and wearing a blazer, and the woman had still looked at her like she had wandered in from the wrong borough. She had never forgotten that. She had also never let it stop her from doing what she needed to do. Amara pushed through the glass door of Maison Valère, and the warm air hit her immediately. Scented, climate-controlled, so aggressively pleasant it almost felt like a warning. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. White, and gold and hushed, the way expensive places are always hushed, as though the air itself understood that it was worth more per square foot than most apartments in the city. A string quartet played from hidden speakers. The carpet was so thick her wet shoes felt wrong standing on it. There were 3 other customers visible. A tall white woman in her 60s examining a row of silk scarves, attended by a young associate who seemed to orbit her like a small moon. A couple near the back, both in cashmere, arguing quietly about a wallet. And then the sales associate behind the central display case, who looked up from her phone the moment Amara walked in. Her name, Amara would later learn, was Vivian Hale. Vivian was perhaps 40, slim, with the kind of blonde hair that looked natural but wasn't, wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream silk blouse, her jewelry tasteful and cold. She had a face that had probably been called beautiful for so many years that she had stopped noticing it and had started using it as a credential instead. She looked at Amara the way people look at fine print, searching for a technicality. Amara did not slow down. She walked to the display case, and she looked at the emerald handbag, and it was exactly as it appeared in the photograph. Structured Italian leather the color of deep forest, gold hardware that caught the light in a way that made it look alive. The strap perfectly proportioned, the whole thing radiating a kind of quiet extravagance that Amara could see immediately, would photograph beautifully, and would last 20 years with proper care. She could see her mother opening it, could see the exact expression on Diane's face, the startled blink, the soft exhale, the small shake of her head that meant she was trying not to cry. "Can I help you with something?" Vivian's voice was cultured and precise, the kind of voice shaped by private schools and careful attention to how sound traveled out of the mouth. She had not moved from behind the counter, and she was not smiling, and her tone carried the particular inflection of a question that wasn't really a question. "I'd like to see the emerald Verano bag," Amara said. "The one in the case." Vivian glanced at the bag, then at Amara. The glance moved slowly, taking inventory. The wet coat, the inside-out umbrella Amara was still holding, the hair that the rain had not been kind to. It was the kind of look designed to be felt without being called out. The kind of look that said, "I have assessed you and the assessment is complete." "That particular piece," Vivian said, "is from our limited heritage collection." She paused. Let the pause do its work. "It's quite specialized. The clientele it's designed for tend to have a very specific aesthetic." Amara looked at her. "I'd still like to see it." "Of course." Vivian did not move toward the case. "I only mention it because the color, it's quite distinctive. Emerald can be a challenging tone. It doesn't flatter everyone." Another pause, deliberate as a scalpel, particularly with certain complexions. The boutique was very quiet. The string quartet on the speakers had moved to something slow and measured, and it felt grotesque suddenly, that music, like a soundtrack selected for the occasion. "And," Vivian continued, her voice dropping to something that might have been intended to sound gentle but landed somewhere closer to clinical, "the silhouette of the bag is quite narrow, quite architectural. It's really intended to complement a more refined figure." The words hit Amara in the chest like something physical. She had experienced prejudice in 100 forms over 34 years, and she had developed responses. The polite brush-off, the cold silence, the quiet exit that preserved her energy for things that mattered. She had learned the cost of public confrontation in spaces where no one was going to take her side, where the complaint would get lost in somebody's filing system and she would go home feeling worse for having tried. She knew all of that. Her whole body knew it. And she was still standing at the counter, and her hands were perfectly still, and her face was arranged with the composure of someone who had been performing composure since childhood, and somewhere beneath the composure, something very old and very tired was breaking in a way that made no sound at all. She did not cry. She would not cry in this room. But she could feel the heat building behind her eyes, and she could hear her own breathing, and she was thinking about 7 months and her mother's hand near that magazine page, and ruined shoes and the rain outside, and the woman across from her who had just quietly, surgically, efficiently told her that she did not belong here, not with her skin, not with her body, not with any part of herself that she had not asked to be born with. Nobody in the boutique moved. The woman with the silk scarves had gone still. The couple near the back had stopped arguing. The associate orbiting the older woman had found something fascinating to examine on the floor. It was the particular cruelty of those moments, that they never happened in private. They always had an audience, and the audience always chose the same thing, every time, in every room like this one, in every version of this moment that had ever existed. They chose to be somewhere else. They chose to look away. They chose the comfort of not having seen, because seeing would require something of them. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind Amara and slightly to the left, and it was low and even, not loud, not aggressive, not performing anything at all. It was just a voice. Calm the way the eye of a storm is calm. Calm the way things are calm when they have already decided. Amara turned. She had not noticed the man before. She would wonder later how that was possible, because he was not the kind of man who disappeared into a room. He was tall, Korean, somewhere in his late 30s, with dark hair pushed back from a face that had the quality of something carved rather than grown, all controlled angles and still water. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit men who have been wearing expensive suits long enough to forget what cheap ones felt like. The collar of his shirt was buttoned high enough that she could only see the edge of what was below, the suggestion of ink beginning, a curl of something dark and detailed climbing toward his jaw. He was looking at Vivian. Vivian was looking at him with the expression of someone trying to determine whether she was about to receive a compliment or a problem. "The Emerald Verano bag," the man said. "I'd like to purchase it." Vivian blinked, reset, summoned the smile that had probably been standard equipment her entire career. "Of course, sir. Wonderful choice." She moved to the case now, immediately, efficiently, unlocking it with the small key she wore on a lanyard, lifting the bag out with the practiced care of someone handling something sacred. He paid in cash. Amara watched the transaction happen, the black card that Vivian accepted without a flicker, the brief exchange, the tissue paper, and the black bag with the white ribbon. The whole thing took less than 4 minutes. Vivian's smile stayed intact throughout, and she thanked him 3 times, which was 3 more times than she had thanked Amara for anything. Then the man turned, and he walked to where Amara was standing, and he held the bag out with both hands, not offering it, presenting it, the way you present something to a person who deserves it. "Please," he said, "take it." Amara stared at him. "I don't—" She stopped. Started again. "I don't accept gifts from strangers." He considered that. "Then don't accept it as a gift." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. Plain, matte white, nothing on it but a name and a number. "Pay me back when you're ready. No interest. No deadline." She looked at the card. Looked at him. Looked at the bag. The room was so quiet that she could hear the soft hum of the climate control system. "Why?" she said. It was not a question with a rising inflection. It was the kind of why that wanted a real answer. He looked at her steadily, and for a moment something moved behind his eyes. Something old, something that had nothing to do with this boutique or this moment or her specifically. Something that had been there long before today. "Because someone should have," he said. He gave a slight nod. Not a bow, not a gesture of ceremony, just acknowledgement, person to person. And he walked toward the door. The glass swung shut behind him without a sound. Amara stood in the middle of Maison Valère with a $1,400 emerald handbag in her hands and a matte white business card between her fingers, and the rain was still coming down outside, and the string quartet was still playing, and Vivian Hale was behind the counter with a smile on her face that had gone stiff and strange in a way that she probably didn't even know yet. Amara put the card in her coat pocket. She walked to the door. She did not look at Vivian. Outside, the rain had eased to a mist, and the sidewalk was shining, and she stood there for a moment on the wet marble steps and breathed, just breathed, the cold air moving in and out of her lungs. And she looked down at the bag in her hands, and she thought about her mother. Thought about the look on Diane's face when she turned a magazine page and thought no one was watching. She pulled out the card. SEO Jin Tai. 1 phone number. No title, no company, no explanation. She stood there a long time. And she did not know could not have known, standing there in the mist on Fifth Avenue with the city moving around her and the card growing slightly damp between her fingers, that by the time she woke up the following Monday morning, the man whose name was on that card would have already set something enormous and irreversible into motion, something that Vivian Hale would not see coming, something that would change the word consequences for everyone in that room, and something that would eventually force Amara Brooks to ask herself a question she was not at all sure she was prepared to answer: whether justice, when it finally arrived, looked exactly the way she had always imagined it would, or whether it looked like something else entirely. The card sat on Amara's kitchen counter for 3 days. She didn't throw it away. She also didn't call the number. She put it next to the coffee maker on Sunday night when she got home, still damp from the rain, still slightly disbelieving, and every morning after that she looked at it while the coffee brewed and then looked away and went about her day as though the card were simply a thing that existed in the world, like a utility bill or a dry cleaning receipt, something she would deal with eventually. The bag she had wrapped in its original tissue paper and placed inside her closet on the high shelf behind the winter sweaters. She hadn't called her mother. She hadn't told anyone what had happened at Maison Valère. She had come home, eaten the leftover rice cold because she forgot to heat it, and sat on her couch in the dark for about 40 minutes doing nothing in particular, which was her body's way of processing things it didn't yet have words for. She had clients Monday and Tuesday. A finance executive on the Upper East Side who wanted a wardrobe overhaul before a board presentation, and who paid well but had a habit of second-guessing every choice Amara made until Amara explained the psychology behind it, at which point she would go very quiet and then pretend she had agreed all along. A recently divorced woman in her 40s from Brooklyn who wanted, in her own words, to stop dressing like a wife and start dressing like whatever came after a wife. That session went long. It went long because Amara was good at her job, and because the recently divorced woman needed someone to tell her that her body was not the problem, that the clothing industry's failure to serve her was not a referendum on her worth, that she had spent 20 years making herself smaller for a man who had eventually left anyway, and she did not have to do that anymore. Amara said all of this with the calm authority of a person who had delivered this message many times before. She said it and meant it and believed it. And then she drove home on Tuesday evening and walked past the kitchen counter and looked at the card and felt the specific exhaustion of a person who gives what they cannot yet keep. Wednesday morning, she called her mother. "I have something for you," she said, without preamble, because she had her mother's habit of skipping small talk when the real thing was pressing. "What kind of something?" Diane said. The sound of the nursing home was audible in the background. Soft institutional noise, the kind that became invisible after years of working in it. "Come for dinner Saturday. I'll show you. Amara." "Saturday, Mom." A pause. Diane made a sound that was part skepticism and part fondness, the sound of a woman who knew her daughter well enough to know when she was being managed and loved her enough to accept it anyway. "Fine. I'll bring the sweet potatoes." "Don't bring anything." "I'm bringing the sweet potatoes." She brought the sweet potatoes. But Saturday was 3 days away, and on Wednesday afternoon, Amara's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, and something in her stomach shifted before she even answered it, the way your body sometimes knows what your mind is still catching up to. "Ms. Brooks?" The voice was measured, accented with something she couldn't place precisely. Not heavy, just present, the accent of someone who had learned English from books first and people second. "This is Jin Tai, from the boutique." She stood in the middle of her living room with her phone pressed to her ear and did not say anything for a moment. "You called me," she said finally. "I did." "I have your number. I was the one with the card." "Yes," he said without apology or explanation. She moved to the window, stood looking at the street below, the midday traffic, a delivery truck double parked outside the bodega, a woman with a stroller navigating around it with the practiced irritation of someone who had done this maneuver 100 times. "How did you get my number?" "You have a website for your styling business. There's a contact form." She had a contact form. She had set it up 4 years ago and had fielded exactly one inquiry through it that turned out to be spam. "You could have just emailed through the form." "I could have," he said. She waited for him to explain why he hadn't. He didn't. "What do you want?" she said, which was blunter than she intended, but not blunter than she felt. I want to tell you something, Jinte said, about Maison Valère, about what happened after you left. Amara's grip on the phone tightened slightly. She was very aware of the pressure of it against the side of her face, the small warmth of the screen. What happened? I made a phone call, he said. Several, over the past few days. You should know that things are in motion now, not because of anything you did, because of what she did. What kind of things? The kind that tend to move on their own once you give them the right push. A pause. There are journalists. There are internal people at the company who own the boutique. There are documents now in the hands of people who know what to do with them. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from somewhere else. Amara sat down on the arm of her couch. She did not fully sit, just perched there, on the edge, the way you sit when you are not sure yet whether you need to be ready to stand back up. What documents? She said. Maison Valère has a pattern, Jintaya said. What happened to you was not an accident. It was not one employee having a bad day. The management has received 11 complaints in the past 4 years about similar treatment. Customers of color. Customers who did not match a particular silhouette. None of the complaints resulted in any meaningful action. I found 3 former employees who had reported the behavior internally and were subsequently reassigned or let go. Those people are now talking. The room was very quiet around her. You did all of this, she said, in 3 days. I had help. What kind of help? He didn't answer that directly. The kind I can provide, he said. She stood up, moved to the window again, couldn't help it, as though the street below might offer some reference point for what she was supposed to do with this information. I didn't ask you to do this. No, he said. I didn't ask you for any of it. The bag or the... I didn't ask. I know that. So why? She stopped, pressed her free hand flat against the cold glass of the window. Why are you doing this? And don't give me the answer you gave me in the boutique, because that was an answer for a moment, not an explanation. A longer pause this time. She could hear him breathing, steady and deliberate, and she had the impression, she couldn't have said why, that he was somewhere quiet, somewhere private, and that he had been sitting with the question before she asked it. Because I have resources, he said finally, that most people don't have, and because what she did in that room is something that has been done with impunity in rooms like that one for a very long time. And because impunity, in my experience, only ends when someone decides the cost of tolerating it is higher than the cost of ending it. That's still a speech, Amar said. That's not a reason. He was quiet for a moment. Then, no, you're right. Another pause, shorter. I had a reason. It's not something I discuss easily, but you're right that you deserve more than the speech. She waited. He did not supply the reason. Not then. I'll tell you, he said, if you'll have dinner with me, not as a date, as... He seemed to search for the word. As a conversation that requires more than a phone call. Amara looked at her reflection in the window. Dark eyes, tired, careful. The woman looking back at her had been taking other people's measurements for 11 years. She was very good at reading the space between what someone said and what they meant. She was also very aware that she was a woman, and he was a man she had met once under circumstances that were already strange, and that agreeing to dinner with a stranger whose exact nature she did not understand was a thing she should consider carefully. She considered it. Not dinner, she said. Coffee, public place, daytime. Of course, he said, without a beat of hesitation, as though he had expected exactly this counter and found it entirely reasonable. They agreed on a cafe in Midtown the following afternoon. She hung up and stood in her living room for a moment, and then she went to look up the name on his card. The search results were not nothing, but they were not much. A business entity registered in New York linked to a holding company based in Seoul. A brief mention in a Korean financial newspaper from 7 years ago. Photo caption reading Seo Jin-tae at the opening of the Hansung Group's New York office. The photograph was small and slightly blurred. It was him, same face, younger, same quality of stillness. The Hansung Group, when she searched further, turned out to be a diversified investment company with holdings across real estate, hospitality, and international logistics. Their New York office was listed as having been established 6 years ago. Beyond that, the trail went deliberately thin, the kind of thin that is not absence of information but the careful management of it. She closed her laptop. She did not sleep well that night. The cafe was called Perch, on 52nd between 6th and 7th, the kind of place that served excellent coffee and very small pastries, and was crowded enough at 2 in the afternoon to feel safe without being so crowded that conversation was impossible. Amara arrived 7 minutes early, which was her habit, and chose a table with a view of both the door and the back wall, which was a habit she had developed without ever consciously deciding to develop it. Jinte arrived exactly on time. He was in a different suit from the one he'd worn at the boutique, dark navy this time, equally precise, equally expensive. The tattoo that had been visible above his collar before was hidden today, shirt buttoned fully to the throat, and she found herself thinking that the covering was also a decision, that everything about this man seemed like a decision made rather than a habit formed. He sat down across from her, ordered black coffee when the server came, and waited for her to speak first. "How much trouble?" Amara said. "Did you actually start?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the suggestion of one. For them, significant. "Walk me through it." He did. Methodically, without theater, the way someone recounts logistics. This was done, then this, then this. The phone calls to the 3 former employees of Maison Valère who had been pushed out after internal complaints. The introduction of those employees to a journalist named Carla Reyes, who wrote the retail and luxury industry beat for a major city publication and had been investigating discriminatory practices in high-end retail for 8 months and had not yet had the concrete sourcing she needed to publish. The anonymous submission to the corporate oversight office of the parent company that owned Maison Valère, a Paris-based luxury conglomerate with 11 other brands under its umbrella, of an internal communications document that outlined in fairly explicit terms the customer profile the boutique's management considered appropriate for its flagship New York location. The document was not illegal. What it described was not technically illegal, but it was documented. And it was, put plainly, damning. Amara listened to all of this without interrupting. She had her coffee cup in both hands, and she did not drink from it. When he finished, she set it down. "The journalist," she said. "Carla Reyes, she's going to publish?" "She has enough now. My understanding is the piece is already written. She's waiting on a response from the parent company's communications office, which she is required by editorial standards to request before publication. And the internal document, the customer profile document." She looked at him. "How did you get that?" He held her gaze without discomfort. "Carefully," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, large hands, she noticed, with a stillness to them that matched the stillness of the rest of him. "I have people who know how to find things," he said. "I'd rather not be more specific than that, not because I'm hiding from you specifically, but because the less you know about the mechanism, the less complicated your position is in any conversation you might need to have later. You're protecting me from information. I'm protecting you from liability," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. The cafe moved around them. Espresso machine hissing, someone's phone vibrating on a table across the room, the low continuous murmur of 20 conversations, none of which were theirs. "Who are you?" she said. He didn't flinch. "I run several businesses," he said. "Some of them are straightforward. Real estate, logistics. Some are less straightforward." He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. "I don't pretend to be something I'm not, but I also don't advertise what I am." "Which is what, exactly?" "A man," he said, "who solved a problem for someone I didn't know, because I had the ability to solve it, and because leaving it unsolved was not something I was willing to do." She should have left it there. Any reasonable version of herself would have left it there, thanked him for the information, paid for her coffee, and walked out of this cafe and spent the rest of her day creating careful distance between herself and whatever Jintai was or was not. She knew that. She was a woman of 34 who had survived a career in an industry that did not want her, who had built something real from nothing, who did not take unnecessary risks. But there was something in the way he had said leaving it unsolved was not something I was willing to do that snagged on something inside her. "You said," she said carefully, "on the phone, that you had a reason, a personal one, that it wasn't easy to discuss." He looked at her. "You promised you'd tell me if I agreed to coffee." He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched something move across his face. Not the calculated stillness he wore like a second suit, but something underneath it, something genuine and unguarded that came and went quickly, but had been there. "My mother," he said. "Not my biological mother. The woman who raised me from the time I was 9 years old after my father died. Her name was Park Soo-yeon. She worked as a housekeeper for a very wealthy family in Seoul. She was exceptional at her work, and she cared about the people she worked for in a way that made no sense to me as a child because the way they treated her made no sense to me either. They spoke about her in front of her as though she were not present. They had their friends come to the house and the friends would speak about her the same way." He paused, set down the coffee cup. "When I was 16, she took me to a department store, a very expensive one. She had saved money for months to buy herself one thing, a coat. A good winter coat because the coat she owned was 7 years old and the lining had started to separate at the shoulders. She had picked out the coat she wanted from a catalog, and she had gone to that store knowing exactly what she wanted and with exactly enough money to buy it." He stopped. Amara waited. "The woman at the counter told her the coat had been sold," he said. "Then a woman who came in 20 minutes after us, a woman who was dressed the way wealthy women dress, who walked the way wealthy women walk, purchased that same coat from that same counter. My mother watched it happen and said nothing, and we left the store and she walked the whole way home without speaking." He looked down at his hands. "I walked next to her, and I did not say anything either. I was 16 and I did not know what to say, and I was so angry that I could not trust my own mouth. But what I remember most is not the anger. What I remember is that I did not do anything. I did not go back to the counter. I did not say a word to that woman. I walked out of that store next to the person who had raised me, and I let her be erased, and I did nothing." He looked back up at Amara. "I have not forgotten that. I don't think I ever will." The cafe continued around them. Someone laughed at a table near the door. The espresso machine hissed. "How old were you when she died?" Amara said. He looked at her sharply. Just for a moment. Then the sharpness faded. 22, he said. "How did you—" "You used past tense," she said. "Raised me, not raises me." He was quiet. 22, he said again, before I could do anything worth doing. They sat with that for a moment. Then Amara's phone buzzed on the table between them, and she looked down at it reflexively, and what she saw was a news alert from the same publication that employed Carla Reyes. The headline read, "Maison Valère under investigation. Former employees allege systematic discrimination at flagship Manhattan location." The article had published. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now. She turned the phone so he could see the screen. He looked at it. His expression did not change in any large way, but she saw something settle in him, not satisfaction exactly. Something closer to the absence of attention he had been carrying. "It started," she said. "Yes." She looked at the headline again, then at him. "She's going to know it was you." "Probably." "Vivian Hale. She's going to know someone came after her specifically." "What she's going to know," Jinte said, "is that what she did had consequences. That's all she needs to know." Amara stared at her phone. She scrolled down. The article named the boutique, named the pattern of complaints, named former employees by first name only. It did not name Vivian Hale, but it quoted, in careful legal language, a source who described a specific incident that had occurred 3 days prior, involving a customer of color who had been told a product was not suited to her complexion or her figure. The description was precise enough that anyone who had been in that boutique on Saturday would know exactly what incident was being described, which meant Vivian Hale would know, which meant Vivian Hale would be getting a phone call from her manager right now, or possibly her manager was already standing in front of her, or possibly the email had already arrived with the subject line that ended a career. Amara felt something cold move through her. Not satisfaction, not regret, something that was neither of those things and that she did not have a name for yet. This is going to affect more people than just her, Amar said. The store, the other employees. The other employees who did nothing, Jintai said. While it happened in front of them, she looked up. That's not justice. That's collateral damage. He held her gaze steadily. Those two things are not always different. They should be, she said, and she heard the heat in her own voice and did not pull it back. If you're going to use power, you're responsible for where the edges of it land. You can't just set something moving and call it clean because your intention was clean. He did not argue. He didn't fold either. He sat across from her with his coffee cup in his still hands, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who is actually listening rather than waiting to respond. And he said, "You're right." The two words landed simply. No qualifier. No follow-up. She had not expected that. She looked back down at her phone. The article's comments section was already filling. By the evening, the story would be on 3 other outlets. By the following morning, the name Maison Valère would be the center of a conversation that the boutique's parent company in Paris was not going to be able to manage quietly. And somewhere in that boutique right now, Vivian Hale was about to find out what it cost to be very, very wrong about who was standing in front of her. Amar's phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a New York number she didn't recognize, but the area code was right for a media outlet, and the timing was not a coincidence. She looked at Jintai. He looked back at her. "You should answer it," he said quietly. "What you choose to say is entirely yours. That part I could not plan for you and did not try to." She held the ringing phone and looked at this man she had met 4 days ago and understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that the moment she answered this call, she was no longer a bystander in whatever he had set in motion. She was inside it. She would be named. Her words would be quoted. Her face, her body, her skin, the exact things Vivian Hale had weaponized, would become part of a public story that she had never agreed to tell. And somewhere behind her ribs, beneath the fear and the exhaustion and the complicated things she could not yet name, there was something else. Something that had been quiet for a very long time. The phone kept ringing. She answered the phone. "Ms. Brooks." The voice on the other end was professional, female, brisk in the way of someone who made calls like this for a living and had learned to move fast before the person on the other end lost their nerve. "My name is Dana Ferris. I'm a senior reporter at the New York Standard. I'm calling about an incident that occurred at Maison Valère this past Saturday. I believe you were present. I'd like to ask you a few questions if you have a moment." Amar's eyes were on Jintai across the table. He had not looked away. "How did you get my name?" Amar said. "I have a source who confirmed you were in the boutique at the time of the incident described in our article published today. I'm not able to tell you more than that about my sourcing. But I want to be clear. I'm not calling to pressure you. Your choice to speak or not speak is entirely yours, and we will report the story with or without your statement. I'm calling because your perspective matters to the accuracy of what we publish next." "What do you mean, what you publish next?" A brief pause. "The article that went up this afternoon is the first piece. We're preparing a follow-up that will go deeper into the specific Saturday incident. The sales associate involved has been identified. We expect the boutique's parent company to issue a statement by tomorrow morning. When that happens, the story becomes significantly larger." Another pause. "Having your account on record, even on background, even anonymously, gives the follow-up more foundation than it currently has." Amara looked down at the table, at the coffee she hadn't finished, at the white edge of Jintai's card still in her coat pocket, the corner visible above the fabric. "Give me your direct number," she said. "I'll call you back within the hour." She hung up before Dana Ferris could respond. She set the phone down on the table between them and pressed both palms flat on either side of it, as though she needed to feel something solid, and she looked at Jintai and said, "You gave her my name." He did not deny it. "I confirmed to my source that you were present and that the incident had happened to a specific customer. I did not give your name directly. The connection would have been findable through the boutique's own records, a credit card transaction, a stylist appointment that brought you to that area. There are several ways a good reporter Stop." She held up one hand. "Stop explaining the mechanics. That is not what I'm asking." He stopped. "You told me," she said, each word measured and separate, "that what I chose to say was entirely mine. That part you could not plan for and did not try to. She looked at him. And now I find out that a reporter already knows my name before I answered the phone. That means whatever I said, answer or don't answer, talk or don't talk, I was already in the story. You had already put me in it. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the silence of two people sitting with something difficult together. The silence of two people on opposite sides of something. You're right, he said. And the way he said it this time was different from the way he'd said it before. Not clean agreement, but something heavier. The particular weight of a man who knows he has done something defensible, and also knows that defensible is not the same as right. I acted on what I believed was just, he said. I did not fully account for the fact that justice, when it moves through people, not around them. That's a very elegant way, Amara said, to say that you used me without asking. He said nothing. She pushed back her chair, stood up, pulled her coat from the back of it, and put it on without looking at him, the automatic movements of her hands giving her something to do, while her mind did what it needed to do with what she had just understood. I'm going to call her back, Amara said. The reporter. I'm going to decide for myself what I say and what I don't say. And then you and I are going to need to have a very different conversation than the one we've been having. She walked out of the cafe. The air on 52nd Street was cold and bright, and the lunch crowd was thinning out, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed for a moment, in, out, watching a cab lean on its horn somewhere down the block. She felt the particular sharpness that came after betrayal, not the hot kind of anger, but the cold kind, the kind that settled in behind the sternum and made everything feel slightly more precise. She called Dana Ferris back. She talked for 22 minutes. She was measured and specific, and she used the language of her own experience without inflating it and without softening it, because both of those things would have made it less true. She described what Vivian Hale had said. She described the silence of the room. She described the man who had purchased the bag and presented it to her. And at Dana Ferris's question about his identity, she said, "That's not relevant to the story about the boutique." And Dana Ferris, to her credit, did not push. When she hung up, she felt hollow in the way she sometimes felt after difficult client sessions. The specific depletion of having given something real of yourself into an uncertain space and not knowing yet what it would become. She did not go back into the cafe. She sent Jean Tai a text that said, "We need to talk properly. Not coffee. Call me tonight." His reply came in under 30 seconds. "I'll call at 8. She spent the afternoon doing paperwork she had been avoiding, sitting at her desk with her laptop open and her phone face down, and at 5:30 she called her mother to confirm Saturday dinner. "You sound tired," Diane said immediately. "I'm fine." "You sound tired and like something happened." "I'm fine, Mom." "Amara." "Saturday," she said. "I'll explain Saturday." That night Jinte called at exactly 8, and she answered on the second ring, and she had been rehearsing what she wanted to say, and when she heard his voice, the rehearsal evaporated. "The journalist called me back this afternoon," she said. "She told me the boutique's PR agency had already contacted the Standard with a statement. The statement said the behavior described in the article was inconsistent with Maison Valaire's values, and that the associate in question had been placed on administrative leave pending internal review." She stopped. Let that land. Administrative leave. Not terminated. Leave. "That will change," Jinte said. "Maybe. Maybe not. My point is that right now a woman who told me my complexion and my figure made me unworthy of a product is sitting at home on paid leave, while 3 former employees who spoke to your journalist are now identifiable to the company that fired them and any lawyer that company decides to retain." A pause. "The former employees understood the risk." "Did they? Or did your source tell them what they needed to hear to get them comfortable enough to talk?" Another pause. Longer. "That's a serious thing to accuse someone of." "I'm not accusing, I'm asking." She had her free hand pressed flat against the top of her thigh, the same grounding gesture she'd used at the cafe, needing the physical solidity of something. "I'm asking because I have been in rooms my entire life where powerful people made decisions about what information people like me needed in order to go along with something, and it always got justified afterward with the outcome. Look, it worked. Look, the result was justice, and maybe sometimes that's true, But the person who decided what we needed to know got to stay clean, while the people who got told exactly enough to agree got to carry the consequences. She heard him breathing on the other end, not rapidly, not with defensiveness, just present, attending. "I hear you," he said. "That's also not enough," she said. "Hearing me. I need you to tell me what else is in motion that I don't know about. All of it. Because I'm in this story now, whether I chose to be or not, and I need to know what I'm standing in." What he told her over the next 40 minutes was not all of it. She understood that. She understood it partly because of the pauses between certain things he said, and partly because she was a woman who read people for a living and she could hear the edges of what was being left out, the same way she could feel when a blazer was cut slightly wrong, not always visible, but always present. But what he told her was more than he had told her before, and it was enough to change the shape of what she thought she understood. The Hansung Group's New York holdings included, through 2 layers of holding companies, a minor stake in the same Paris-based luxury conglomerate that owned Maison Valère. It was a small stake, small enough to be technically unremarkable, large enough to have given Jin Tai access to certain internal communications networks from which the customer profile document had come, which meant that the document had not been obtained by a stranger acting on principle alone. It had been obtained through the mechanisms of a man who had a financial relationship with the company he was now publicly dismantling. Amara sat with that for a moment. "You have money in the company that owns the boutique," she said, "a very small percentage, through intermediaries. And you used access you had through that position to pull an internal document that is now in the hands of a journalist." "Yes, which means the company, when they investigate the leak, and they will investigate the leak, will eventually trace it back not to some anonymous whistleblower, but to a shareholder." Silence. "Have you thought about what happens then?" she said. "I have." "And?" "And the stake is small enough to divest without significant financial consequence. By the time any investigation reaches the right layer of holding companies, the connection will no longer exist." She closed her eyes, opened them, looked at the ceiling of her apartment. "So you're going to erase your financial trail while 3 former employees of that boutique have their names attached to this story." The silence that followed was one of the longer ones. When he spoke, his voice had changed by a fraction. Not in volume, not in tone exactly, but in something underneath. The specific quality of a man hearing something about himself that he has not previously allowed himself to hear directly. "That was not the intention," he said. "Intention doesn't live in the same place as consequence," she said. "You told me that, actually, in different words." Friday came without the follow-up article. Then Saturday morning arrived, and it came instead with something else, something Amara found on her phone at 7:42 a.m., while she was still in bed and had not yet had coffee and was in no condition for what she was about to read. It was a message on her business Instagram. From an account with no profile photo and no posts, created 3 days ago. The message read, "We know you were working with the man who leaked the document. We have the call records. Before you talk to anyone else, you should know what he actually is and what you're actually involved in. Check your email." Her stomach dropped in a specific way. Not the fall of surprise, but the fall of something that has been suspended and whose suspension you had been distantly aware was temporary. She checked her email. The message was from an address that was a string of random characters at a domain she didn't recognize. It contained 2 attachments and no body text. The first attachment was a photograph. It was grainy, taken from distance with a telephoto lens, but it was clear enough. It showed Jin Tai standing outside a building in what appeared to be Lower Manhattan, speaking to 2 men whose faces she did not recognize. One of the men had a tattoo on the side of his neck. The other was holding something that might have been a briefcase or might have been something else entirely. The photograph was time-stamped 18 months ago. The second attachment was a document, 12 pages, in Korean with portions highlighted and crudely translated into English in red text alongside. She read the red text. She read it slowly, standing in her kitchen in her bare feet with the cold tile under her and her coffee maker running and her mother coming to dinner in 8 hours with sweet potatoes, and she read about the Hansung Group's subsidiary in Busan, which was under investigation by South Korean federal authorities for money laundering and connections to a criminal network that controlled distribution routes in 3 Pacific port cities. She read the name Seo Jin Tai in the highlighted Korean text 3 times. She set her phone on the counter and stood there. The coffee maker finished and beeped, and she did not move. She had given her account to a national journalist. Her name was in a story that was about to get significantly larger. She was connected in the journalist's notes to the man who had provided the leaked document. The man who had provided the leaked document was being investigated by a foreign government for crimes that had nothing to do with luxury boutiques or discrimination or an emerald handbag. She picked up her phone and called Jin Tai. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant possibly he already knew. "Someone sent me something," she said, "this morning. Email. About you, about your company in Korea." The pause before he answered was 1 beat too long. "I know," he said. Everything in her went very still. "You know," she said, "I was going to call you this morning." "You were going to call me." She could hear her own voice doing something at the edges, not breaking, not rising, but thinning the way a material thins before it tears. "You were going to call me." Jin-tae, who sent this? People who don't want the story about Maison Valère to publish. People who would prefer that the document disappear and the former employees recant and everything go back to being very quiet. Who are they? Associates of the parent company. They have resources. They know how to apply pressure. So they applied it to me. She set her free hand flat on the counter again, cold granite under her palm. They found the weakest point in whatever you built and they pressed on it, and the weakest point was me. A woman with a public styling business and a name in a reporter's notes who has no idea what she actually got involved in. "Amara, do not say my name like that right now." Her voice was flat and even and cold in a way that even she had not heard from herself before. "I need you to tell me, right now, no omissions, no protecting me from liability, what is true about the investigation in Korea." The silence stretched. "There is an investigation," he said finally. "It is not into my direct conduct. It is into the Busan subsidiary which operates independently of my personal holdings and which I divested from 18 months ago. The investigation is ongoing, and I am not a named target. The document I was sent names you. The document you were sent was prepared by someone who wants me to appear to be a named target. There is a difference between appearing in a document and being the subject of an inquiry. And how am I supposed to know which one is true?" He did not answer immediately. "You can't," he said, "not without trusting me. And I understand that trusting me right now is an unreasonable thing to ask." She stood in her kitchen and looked out the window at the building across the alley, the fire escapes with their rust stains and their abandoned potted plants, the ordinary architecture of a Saturday morning in a city that kept moving regardless of what fell apart inside individual apartments. "I have a journalist who is going to call me Monday," she said, "for the follow-up piece. And now I have a document that connects you to a criminal investigation. If I tell her about this document, the story becomes something different. If I don't tell her, I'm sitting on information and I am inside a story I don't understand, and someone knows that I'm inside it and they just demonstrated that they know how to reach me." "If you tell her," Jin-tae said, "the story becomes about me and not about Maison Valère. The discrimination story disappears. 11 complaints over 4 years disappear. Vivian Hale goes back to work. Everything I started goes quiet." His voice was steady, but she could hear something underneath it now. Not desperation, but something close to the place where desperation lives before it becomes visible. "And the people who sent you that email will have won. Not because they were right. Because they were willing to do something I was not willing to do to you." "What were they not willing to do?" "Lie," he said. "To you directly, to your face. Everything in that document is technically accurate and entirely misleading, and the people who sent it know the difference and chose to send it anyway." Amar's throat felt tight. She swallowed. "You are asking me," she said slowly, "to help you. After everything that's happened in the last week, after I found out you put my name in play without asking, after I found out you have connections to a criminal investigation in another country, after someone sent me an anonymous email at 7 in the morning to make sure I understand how exposed I am, you are asking me to protect your story." "No," he said. And this time something in his voice broke the surface. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, the way ice cracks. I am telling you that you are the only person in this situation whose hands are completely clean. And I'm telling you that what you decide will determine what this story is. Not me. I am already what I am. I have always been what I am. But what happened to you in that boutique is real, and it was wrong, and it deserves to be what the world sees. And if my past makes that impossible, then I need you to know that I understand. And I will accept whatever you decide. She turned away from the window. The coffee was ready, and she had not poured it, and the morning had become something entirely different from the morning she had expected, and her mother was coming in 8 hours with sweet potatoes. She stood in her kitchen, and she held the phone, and she understood that she was standing at the exact point where the two things she wanted, the truth about what had been done to her and the safety of her own life and name, had stopped being the same thing and had become a choice. And the woman who had spent 34 years turning back had to decide whether she was still that woman or whether she had already, somewhere in the last 7 days, without fully noticing the moment it happened, become someone else entirely. She poured the coffee. That was the first thing she did after she hung up the phone. She poured the coffee, both hands steady, and she drank half of it standing at the counter looking at nothing. And she let her mind do what it needed to do without interference. She had learned this about herself over years of working in high-pressure situations with difficult clients, that her best thinking happened not when she chased it, but when she gave it room and got out of its way. By the time the mug was empty, she knew what she was going to do. She was not going to call Dana Ferris. Not yet. Not until she understood more. She was also not going to run. She texted Jin Tai, "I need you to meet me in person. Today. Not coffee. Somewhere private. Can you do that?" His reply, "Yes, tell me where." She named a place, a small Korean restaurant in Koreatown she had been to twice with a client, quiet enough on Saturday afternoons to have a real conversation, public enough that she was not alone with a man she was still in the process of deciding whether to trust. She told him noon. He confirmed without question. Then she sat down at her kitchen table with her laptop and spent 90 minutes doing the kind of research she should have done before the coffee in Midtown. She was thorough. She was methodical. She had developed research instincts over years of vetting trends and sourcing garments and tracing supply chains back to their origins. And she applied those same instincts now to Seo Jin Tai and the Hansung Group and the Busan subsidiary and the name of the South Korean federal agency whose initials appeared in the translated portions of the document she'd been sent. What she found was complicated in the way that real things are complicated rather than in the way that constructed things are complicated. Constructed things have a particular quality of neatness. The details align too cleanly, the narrative too complete. What she found was messier. The Busan subsidiary was real, and the investigation was real, and Jin Tai's name appeared in regulatory filings because his name appeared in the ownership chain of a company that had since been restructured. The divestment he had described was documented in a Korean business registry, time-stamped 18 months ago, 3 months before the investigation became public. That timing could mean he had known and moved early. It could also mean he had moved for unrelated reasons, and the investigation had followed someone else's thread. She could not tell which from what was publicly available, and she understood that she was not going to be able to tell, and that this uncertainty was the specific weapon the people who had sent her that email had chosen to deploy. They had not sent her a lie. They had sent her a truth with the context removed, which was a more efficient instrument than a lie because it was harder to refute and harder to recover from. She closed the laptop. She got dressed with the deliberateness of someone preparing for something that required care. Dark trousers, a deep burgundy blouse, her good coat, the one she wore when she needed to feel like herself in situations designed to make her feel like less. She did her hair. She put on the earrings her father had given her when she got her first client, small gold hoops that she wore when she needed to remember that she had been loved by someone who believed in her before the world had any evidence it should. She left the apartment at 11:40. The restaurant was called Hanok, and on Saturday afternoons it smelled of doenjang and sesame and something warm and fermented that hit you in the chest the moment you walked through the door and made the body decide before the mind did that this was a place for staying, not passing through. The lunch crowd was light. She chose a table at the back, against the wall, facing the door. Jintai arrived at noon exactly. He looked like a man who had not slept, which surprised her because he had not looked like that the day before. And the change was informative. The controlled surface was still present. The suit, the posture, the face arranged in its habitual stillness. But underneath it, something had shifted, the way you can see strain in a building before any visible crack appears. He sat down across from her, and the server came and he ordered in Korean without looking at the menu, and then he looked at her. "Tell me who sent the email," she said. No greeting, no preamble. "A man named Laurent Brass," Jintai said. "He is the chief legal officer of Compagnie Valente, the Paris conglomerate that owns Maison Valère." "He did it personally?" "Through intermediaries. But the instruction came from him." "How do you know that?" "Because I know Laurent Brass," Jintai said. "We have had prior dealings. I know how he moves, and I know what he uses, and what he used on you is his standard method when he wants someone to stand down. He finds the cleanest person in the room and makes them feel dirty." Amara looked at him steadily. "So you knew this was a possibility, that he might come at me?" A pause. Fractional. "I assessed the probability as low. But not zero." "Not zero." She felt something tighten in her jaw and consciously released it. "You keep making decisions about what risk I'm exposed to," she said, "and then you keep being surprised when the risk you assessed as low turns out to be present." "I know." "Stop saying I know like it resolves something." He closed his mouth, held her gaze. There was something in his eyes that she had not seen before. Not quite desperation, not quite remorse, but the specific expression of a man who is used to controlling outcomes and has encountered, in this woman across this table, something that his control cannot reach. "What do you want me to do?" he said. And it was a genuine question, stripped of strategy. "I want you to tell me everything that Laurent Brasset has on you," she said. "Not the version that protects my liability, the real version. Because if I am going to make a decision about what I do next, I need to make it with complete information, which is something you should have given me from the beginning." He was quiet for a long moment. The food arrived. 2 bowls of soup the server set down with quiet efficiency, steam rising, the smell of it immediate and grounding. Then he told her. It took 40 minutes. He spoke without stopping, without the careful pauses she had come to recognize as the space where omissions lived, and she listened with the focused stillness of someone who has decided to receive information without yet deciding what to do with it. The Busan subsidiary had operated at the margins of legitimacy for several years before his full acquisition of the Hansung Group. The port distribution network had moved goods that were not always declared, through channels that were not always clean, facilitated by men whose livelihoods were not separable from those arrangements. He had known this when he acquired the company. He had begun the process of restructuring immediately. The divestment was genuine and documented. But the years before the divestment existed and he could not undocument them, and Laurent Brass had people in Seoul who had built a file on those years, and who were prepared to give that file, expanded and selectively framed, to the South Korean authorities as a formal complaint if Jintai did not pull back from Maison Valère. "They called you," Amar said, "Thursday night, before I called you Friday morning." He looked at the table. Brasa made the call himself. He was very polite. He said he had deep respect for what I had built and that he hoped we could resolve what he called a misunderstanding in a manner that was good for everyone involved. "And you said," "I told him I would think about it." "Which bought you time." "Which bought me time." He looked up. "And then he sent you the email, because he understood that my thinking was not moving in the direction he wanted." Amara sat with all of it for a moment. The soup in front of her was going to get cold, and she didn't touch it. Outside the restaurant's front window, she could see the midday street, the ordinary Saturday traffic of Koreatown. People with bags, people on phones, a child being pulled along by a man in a hurry. The whole indifferent machinery of a city that had not paused for any of this. "What does he want specifically?" she said. "He wants the journalist source to become unavailable. He wants the former employees to develop cold feet. He wants the story to shrink back to a single bad employee incident that the company handled responsibly. He wants Vivian Hale to go back to work in a different location with a clean record and a settlement agreement that requires her silence about anything she was told internally. And in exchange, he makes the file in Seoul disappear. Or he makes it louder, Jintai said. The choice was presented as mine. Amara finally picked up her spoon, turned it in her fingers without using it. He doesn't know about me, she said. He knows I exist in the story, but he doesn't know what I'm going to do. That's why he sent the email. He's not trying to threaten me. He's trying to make me do his work for him. He's trying to make me pull away from the story on my own so he doesn't have to do anything else. Jinte looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. The recognition of someone hearing their own analysis confirmed by someone else's independent arrival at the same point. Yes, he said. So the question isn't what you do, Amara said. It's what I do. Because I'm the only person in this that Brasa can't directly control. You have exposure in Korea. The former employees can be scared. The journalist can be pressured through her publication's legal team. But I'm a private citizen with no financial ties to anyone in this situation, and the only leverage anyone has over me is the discomfort of being visible. That's not a small leverage, Jintai said. No, she said. It's not. She set the spoon down. But it's also not the same as actual power. She called Dana Ferris from the restaurant bathroom at 12:48 while Jintai waited at the table with his untouched soup. She stood at the small sink and looked at herself in the mirror while the phone rang. Really looked, the way she rarely did, the way she'd trained herself not to in mirrors that were in places where looking too long at yourself could become a kind of wound. She looked at her face. The eyes, the jaw, the natural hair that the cold had made expand slightly at the crown. The earrings her father had given her, the burgundy blouse under the open coat. She looked like someone who had already decided. Ms. Brooks, Dana Ferris said. Someone sent me an email this morning, Amara said, about the man who intervened in the boutique. I'm not going to tell you who he is, but I need you to know that someone connected to Maison Valaire's parent company is actively trying to bury your story by using me as a pressure point. And I need that to be on the record, because if it's on the record, they lose the ability to use me quietly. Silence on the other end. Then, can you send me the email? Yes. Can you tell me who you believe sent it? I can tell you who I believe instructed someone to send it, Amara said. His name is Laurent Brass. He is the chief legal officer of Compagnie Valent. And before you publish anything with that name, you need to verify it independently because I am telling you what I believe and not what I can prove. A longer silence. She could hear Dana Ferris typing. Ms. Brooks, if what you're describing is accurate, if the parent company's legal officer is directly attempting to suppress this story through intimidation of a source, that is itself a significant story. I know, Amara said. Are you prepared for what that means in terms of your visibility in this? She looked at herself in the mirror one more time. I've been visible my whole life, she said. I'm just deciding what for. She went back to the table, sat down, looked at Jintai. I just made things significantly larger, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face. She had no name for it. It was not gratitude exactly, and it was not relief exactly, and it was not admiration, or it was all of those things compacted into something that had no single word. You didn't have to do that, he said. No, she said. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Not for you, for the 11 complaints, for the women who got looked over and walked out and went home and said nothing because they had done the math on what speaking cost and decided they couldn't afford it. She picked up her spoon again. The soup was still faintly warm. You don't get credit for this one. I'm not asking for it. Good. They ate in silence for a while. The restaurant moved around them, the quiet Saturday rhythm of it, and Amara ate the soup and felt the warmth of it move through her chest, and she thought about her mother coming to dinner in 4 hours. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. A text from an unknown number. No area code she recognized. 4 words. You've made a mistake. She turned the phone so Jinte could see it. He read it. His jaw tightened. The first visible physical reaction she had seen from him that was not controlled, and it arrived and departed in less than 2 seconds, but she caught it. "Brasa," he said. "Fast," she said. "He has people watching the journalist's communications." He set down his chopsticks. "Which means he knows you called her. Which means he knows I didn't stand down." "Yes." She put the phone face down on the table. "What does he do next?" Jinte was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who didn't know. The quiet of someone who did know and was deciding how to say it. "He will move to discredit you," he said. "He will look for anything in your professional history, your financial records, your personal life, that he can shape into a narrative that makes you look like an unreliable witness. Or he will look for something in my connection to you that he can use to suggest you are not acting independently, but are a tool of someone with vested interests in damaging the company. So he'll try to make me look like your instrument." "Yes." She felt her heart rate do something in her chest. Not panic, not quite, but the physical signal of a body understanding that it has moved past a boundary it cannot step back over. "Can he find anything? In my connection to you?" He met her eyes. "He will try to construct something. Whether he can find something real depends on what real things exist." A pause. "The bag, the card, the 2 meetings, the phone calls. All of those are real. How they are framed depends entirely on who is doing the framing. So I need my own narrative," she said, "documented, before he builds his." "Yes." She was already picking up her phone. She pulled up her email and began drafting. To Dana Ferris, a detailed timeline. The Saturday at the boutique, the card, the call on Wednesday, the cafe, the revelation about how her name had entered the story, the anonymous email Saturday morning, the text that had just arrived, timestamps, quotes where she could remember them precisely, the specific language Vivian Hale had used, the exact words, the exact cadence of them, because she had not forgotten a single syllable and she never would. She typed for 20 minutes at the table while Jintai sat across from her without speaking and without checking his own phone, which she registered in her peripheral vision as a kind of respect. The recognition that this was her work now, and it required the space he had failed to give her at the beginning. When she was done, she looked up. "I need one more thing from you," she said. "What?" "I need you to be willing to be named, in the story, not the Korea story, the boutique story. I need you to go on the record as the man who purchased the bag, and why. Your real name, not a source, not through intermediaries." She looked at him steadily. "Because right now you're a shadow in this story, and shadows are easy to shape. A man with a name and a face and a reason. That's harder to dismiss." The quality of his stillness changed. She could see him processing it. The particular calculus of a man who had built his entire existence around controlling his own visibility, suddenly being asked to step into a light he had never stood in voluntarily. "If I put my name in this story," he said slowly, "it accelerates the timeline on the Korea matter. Brasa will file with the authorities within days. The file he has been holding as leverage becomes a weapon instead." "I know," she said, "and you're asking me anyway." "I'm telling you what I need," she said. "What you do with it is still your decision." She held his gaze and did not soften her eyes. "But I need you to understand something. I stood in that boutique and I did not disappear. I stood there and I took what that woman said, and I did not collapse, and I did not leave crying, and I did not let them make me nothing. And then you stepped in, and you set something in motion, and you made decisions for me, and I got pulled into something larger than what I agreed to. And now I am choosing, fully choosing, with everything I know, to be in this story, on my terms. And I need the man who started it to be willing to do the same." Jinte looked at her for a long time. Outside the restaurant on the Saturday street, a bus went by, the hydraulic sigh of its doors, the city's indifferent exhale. "All right," he said. It was quiet. It was final. It had the sound of something that could not be taken back. Amara sent the email to Dana Ferris. She attached the anonymous email with its 2 documents. She attached the screenshot of the 4-word text. She wrote at the bottom, "The man who intervened at the boutique is willing to be identified by name. He will be in touch with you directly. Please confirm receipt." She hit send. And in the 40 seconds that followed, 40 seconds of the restaurant's warm smell and Jintai's steady presence across the table and her own heartbeat doing what heartbeats did under pressure. Her phone rang. Not Dana Ferris. A New York number, different from any she had seen before, and when she answered it, the voice on the other end was male, accented in French, cultured and cold, and carrying the specific weight of a man who was not accustomed to being the one making a phone call. "Ms. Brooks," Laurent Brasset said, "I think it would benefit us both considerably if we spoke before you take any further steps. I have something to show you, something about the man sitting across from you right now at Hanok Restaurant on West 32nd Street, that I believe will change the nature of your choices significantly." The cold that went through her then was not fear. It was the understanding that he had known where she was the entire time, and that what was coming next was something that even Jintai, with all his stillness and all his preparation, had not seen coming, because across the table from her, his face had gone the particular color of a man who has just realized that the walls he built around something are no longer where he left them, and that what was inside those walls was now about to be standing in the open where everyone could see it, under a light he had never once in his life chosen to stand in and which was now no longer a choice at all. She did not hang up. That was the first decision, and it happened in less than a second. In the space between hearing Laurent Brasset's voice and understanding what it meant that he knew exactly where she was sitting. She did not hang up, and she did not look at Jintai, and she kept her voice level in the way she had learned to keep it level in rooms that were designed to make her feel small. "Mr. Brasset," she said, "I'm going to put you on speaker." She set the phone on the table between her and Jintai before Brasset could respond, and she watched Jintai's face when the Frenchman's voice came through the small speaker and filled the space between them. "Mr. Seo," Brasset said. His tone shifted slightly. Not warmer, but more formal, the adjustment of a man recalibrating for a larger audience. "I hoped we might all speak together. It seems the most efficient approach given that Ms. Brooks has now positioned herself centrally in matters that originally concerned only the two of us." Jintai looked at the phone on the table. His jaw was set. The color had returned to his face, replaced by something controlled and flat and very cold. "Laurent," he said. "I have been patient," Brasset said. "I want you both to understand that. What I am about to share with Ms. Brooks is something I would have preferred to keep in a smaller room. But patience has a cost, and the cost has now been exceeded." "Say what you have to say," Amar said. A pause. The sound of papers, or something like papers, moving on the other end. "Ms. Brooks, the man sitting across from you, the man who purchased you a handbag and presented himself as a defender of justice, has been under active investigation not only in South Korea, but in this country. Not his subsidiary, not a holding company, him personally. A joint inquiry between the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and the Korean Financial Intelligence Unit has been open for 7 months. I have documentation. I am prepared to send it to you, to your journalist, and to every major outlet that has touched this story in the last 72 hours, within the next 30 minutes, unless we reach an understanding." The restaurant was very quiet around them. Amara could hear the kitchen sounds, distant and ordinary. The clatter of a pan, a brief exchange in Korean between two people who had no idea what was happening at the back table. She looked at Jintai. He was looking at the phone. "Jintai," she said. He raised his eyes to hers. She asked the question without words, just held his gaze and waited. And she watched him make a decision she could not read fully, but could feel the weight of, the specific gravity of a man choosing between the version of himself he had constructed and the version of himself that was actually true. "It's real," he said quietly, not to Brasset, to her. She breathed in slowly, out slowly. "How real?" 7 months, he said. "I've known for 7 months." The particular cold that moved through her then was not rage and not betrayal. It was something older and quieter. The specific weariness of a person who has been lied to, not by cruelty, but by the belief of the person lying that they were somehow protecting something worth the lie. "Mr. Brasset," she said to the phone, "send me the documentation." "Amara?" Jintai said. "Send it," she said again. She didn't raise her voice. There was no need. Brasset sent it. The email arrived on her phone in under 2 minutes. A PDF, 43 pages, Federal letterhead on the cover document, the kind of formatting that did not get fabricated because fabricating it served no purpose when the real thing was available. She scrolled through it at the table while Jin Tai sat across from her and did not speak, and did not look away from her face. The investigation was real. It named Seo Jin Tai directly, not a subsidiary, not a holding company layer, him, for a pattern of financial transactions between the Hansung Group's U.S. operations and entities connected to the Busan distribution network, transactions that had continued, the document alleged, for 14 months after the documented divestment, 14 months after he had told her he had walked away. She put the phone down. She looked at him. 14 months, she said. He held her gaze. It's more complicated than the document makes it appear. That sentence, she said, is doing a tremendous amount of work right now. I know. Stop saying that. She pressed both hands flat on the table. Just tell me what's true, right now. No strategy, no protecting my liability, no deciding what I need to know. What is true? He was quiet for a moment, and she could see it in him. The dismantling of something, the careful architecture of managed disclosure coming apart under the specific pressure of this woman across this table who had been asked to carry things without being given the full weight of them, and who was no longer willing to do that. The divestment was real, he said. The restructuring was real, but there were outstanding obligations, financial obligations to certain parties in the network that could not be cleanly severed without consequences that would have harmed people who were not the targets of any investigation. Workers, families, people whose livelihoods depended on arrangements they had not chosen and could not exit unilaterally. He paused. I continued to facilitate certain transfers to honor those obligations. For 14 months. The U.S. Attorney's Office has characterized those transfers as continuation of criminal enterprise. I have characterized them as a wind-down of humanitarian responsibility. We disagree. She sat with that. And Brasa knows all of this, she said. Brasa's people in Seoul found it 8 months ago. He has been holding it since then. He didn't use it to stop you earlier because he didn't need to, she said. He only needed it once you became a problem. Yes. So the leverage was always there. You went after his boutique knowing he had this file on you. A pause. Yes. You walked into a fight with a man who was holding a knife to your throat, she said, and you didn't tell me. I didn't think he would reach you. You keep not thinking things about me, she said. That turned out to matter considerably. Brasa's voice came from the phone, which she had forgotten was still connected. I trust, he said, with the measured pleasantness of a man who had been listening to all of this and found it useful, that the picture is now clearer for everyone. Miss Brooks, I have no interest in you. You are a private citizen who was treated poorly in one of our stores, and for that I am personally sorry. The associate involved is no longer employed by Maison Valère as of this morning. A pause. What I require is very simple. You speak to your journalist and you explain that the source who provided the leaked document has been identified as someone with a personal financial motive in damaging the company, which is true. You allow the story to return to what it should be, a single employment matter that has been handled. And in exchange, the documentation in my possession concerning Mr. Seo's activities goes back into the drawer where it has been sitting for 8 months. Amara looked at the phone. She looked at Jin Tae. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has run out of moves and knows it, and is waiting to see what the person across from him does with the space his running out of moves has created. She picked up the phone, took it off speaker, held it to her ear. Mr. Brasa, she said, Vivian Hale is gone as of this morning. You just told me that. That is correct? And the 11 prior complaints, the women who were turned away, the employees who reported internally and were reassigned or let go. What happens to them? A brief pause. Those matters are being reviewed internally. That's not an answer. Ms. Brooks, I am offering you, Nate. I heard what you're offering me, she said. I'm telling you it's not enough. She stood up from the table. She was aware of Jin Tae watching her stand, aware of the restaurant around her, the ordinary Saturday of it, the smell of the soup going cold. You fired Vivian Hale because the story was already public and you had no choice. You didn't do it because it was right. You did it because the cost of keeping her became higher than the cost of cutting her. That is not accountability. That is management. She walked toward the door of the restaurant, phone pressed to her ear, coat in her other hand. The story publishes. The follow-up story publishes. Whatever you do with your file on Jintae, you do. That is between you and him and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I genuinely cannot control it. But I am not your instrument, and I am not his instrument, and I am done being the person in this room who absorbs everyone else's calculations. She pushed through the door of the restaurant, and the cold air of West 32nd Street hit her immediately, the city's blunt indifference, the Saturday afternoon traffic, the smell of food from 3 different restaurants overlapping on the sidewalk. Brasso was quiet for a long moment. You understand, he said finally, that this decision has consequences for someone you appear to care about. Every decision has consequences for someone, she said. That's not an argument. That's just how decisions work. She put on her coat one-handed. Do what you're going to do, Mr. Brass. I'm going to do the same. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed the cold air for a moment. In, out, steady. And then she went back inside the restaurant because she had left her purse at the table and also because she was not done. Jintae had not moved. He was sitting exactly as she had left him, both hands on the table, and he looked up when she came back and she could see in his face that he had heard enough of her end of the conversation to know what she had said. He's going to file, Jintae said. Probably. The U.S. Attorney's investigation accelerates. My lawyers have been managing the timeline. That ends now. Yes. She sat back down, picked up the coat she'd put back on and then taken off again because the restaurant was warm, set it on the chair beside her. Is there anything in the file that isn't true? He thought about it carefully. She appreciated that he didn't answer immediately. The characterization is false, he said. The facts as stated are largely accurate. Then you need a lawyer who is very good at the difference between those two things, she said. And you need to stop making decisions based on what you think other people need to be protected from. He looked at her for a long moment. That is going to be a significant adjustment. I imagine it will, she said. She called Dana Ferris at 2:15 from the sidewalk outside the restaurant, having gone back out after finishing what remained of her soup, which she ate because she was hungry and because the situation did not become more manageable on an empty stomach. She told Dana Ferris everything. The phone call from Brass, the documentation he had sent, the nature of the federal investigation into Jintae. She told it the way she had learned to tell hard things, without dramatic inflation and without protective softening, just the shape of it, the actual shape. She told it because partial truth was the instrument Brass had been using from the beginning, and she was not going to pick up his instrument, and because Dana Ferris was a journalist who was going to find out anyway, and the only question was whether she found out from Amara or from the file Brassi was already preparing to release. If I publish this, Dana Ferris said, the story becomes significantly more complicated. It was always significantly more complicated, Amara said. You were just working with incomplete information. The source who provided the document, if he's under federal investigation, his credibility as a source is compromised. His credibility as a person is complicated, Amara said. The document he provided is either accurate or it isn't. What's in it either reflects real internal policy at that company or it doesn't. That's what your editors will need to determine. I can't do that part for you. She paused. What I can tell you is that 11 women filed complaints over 4 years and nothing happened to any of them. That is a fact that doesn't change based on who brought it to your attention. A long pause. I need to talk to my editors, Dana Ferris said. I know. I'm available when you need me. She took the subway home. She sat in the orange plastic seat and held her purse in her lap and watched the stations pass and thought about her mother coming in 3 hours. The sweet potatoes, the emerald bag and tissue paper on the high shelf behind the winter sweaters, the way Diane's fingers had almost touched the photograph in the magazine without quite touching it, the specific self-denial of a woman who had spent decades putting her hands back in her lap. She thought about what it cost to want something and not let yourself have it. She thought about what it cost to let yourself have it. She was home by 3:15. She cleaned the apartment, not because it needed cleaning badly, but because the physical action of it was useful. The specific usefulness of moving through familiar space, doing purposeful things when the interior of the mind was still processing something it would not fully process for days. She vacuumed. She wiped down the kitchen counters. She changed the hand towels in the bathroom. She took the emerald bag down from the high shelf and unwrapped it and looked at it on the kitchen table in the afternoon light coming through the window. The deep green of it, the gold hardware catching the low winter sun. It was exactly as beautiful as it had been in the magazine. She rewrapped it, tied the ribbon herself, put it in a handled shopping bag that she set by the front door so she would not forget it. Diane Brooks arrived at 5:48, 12 minutes later than she'd said she would be, which was her standard margin. She had the sweet potatoes in a foil pan and a look on her face that said she had been thinking about this visit in the specific way she thought about things that she expected to involve her daughter telling her something she didn't know how to receive. "You look tired," Diane said, stepping inside. "You always say that." "You're always tired." Diane set the sweet potatoes on the counter and took off her coat and looked around the apartment the way she always did. The maternal inventory of a space, checking for signs. Her eyes landed on the handled bag by the door. She looked at it for one moment and then looked away with the practiced discipline of a woman who had taught herself not to want things out loud. They cooked together. Amara had made jerk chicken, the recipe her grandmother had given her mother who had given her, the one that required marinating overnight and a specific patience with the oven temperature. Diane reheated the sweet potatoes and made the sauce the way she made it, with the brown sugar and the butter and the pinch of something she always said was a secret and which Amara had long ago identified as nutmeg. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with the ease of people who had been moving around each other in kitchens their whole lives. They ate. They talked about Diane's work, a new patient she was fond of, a coworker drama she relayed with the dry detachment of someone who had seen too many coworker dramas to be surprised by them anymore. They talked about the building where Diane lived, which had a new super who was actually responsive, which they agreed was a phenomenon almost too good to be true. They did not talk about the boutique or Jintai or Laurent Bras, or the federal investigation or the article or any of the things that had occupied every waking moment of Amara's last 7 days. Those things were real, and they were not going anywhere, and there would be time for them tomorrow and the day after, and the months of legal and professional and personal complexity that were undoubtedly coming. But they were not for tonight. Tonight was for the sweet potatoes. Tonight was for her mother. After dinner, while the dishes were soaking and Diane was standing at the kitchen window with her after-dinner coffee, looking at the building across the alley, the same way Amara had looked at it that morning. The fire escapes, the lit windows, the ordinary stack of other people's lives. Amara went to the front door and picked up the shopping bag. "I have something for you," she said. Diane turned from the window. Amara held out the bag. Diane looked at it, set down her coffee cup with the careful deliberateness of someone buying herself a moment. "Amara, what did you do?" "Open it." "What did you—" "Mom." She kept her arm extended. "Please, open it." Diane took the bag, slowly. She set it on the kitchen table and unfolded the handles and looked inside and went very still. She lifted out the wrapped package and set the tissue paper aside with the precise care of someone who does not want to damage anything, and when the bag was in her hands, the emerald, the gold, the Italian leather, she made a sound that was not quite a word. She pressed her lips together. She blinked. "This is—" She stopped, started again. "This is the bag from the magazine." "Yes." Diane looked up at her. Her eyes were full, the specific fullness of a woman who does not cry easily and is fighting herself right now. "How long have you—" "7 months, Amara said. Diane looked back down at the bag, turned it slightly in her hands, the gold hardware catching the kitchen light. Her fingers moved over the leather the way her fingers had moved near the photograph, not quite touching at first and then fully touching, pressing gently, learning the texture of something she had only known as an image. "Baby," she said. Her voice had gone rough. "You looked at that page," Amara said, "for a long time. You thought I didn't see, but I saw." Diane was shaking her head slowly, not in refusal, but in something that didn't have a clean name. The overwhelm of being seen, really seen, in a small, quiet moment you thought had passed unnoticed. "You didn't have to do this," Diane said. "I know. This is too much." "It really isn't," Amara said. She came to the table and stood beside her mother and looked at the bag in Diane's hands. "You worked for 30 years and you gave everything to everybody, and you have one winter coat that's 7 years old, and you don't think you deserve things that cost money. You do. You have always deserved those things. You just spent too long around people who didn't say so." Diane looked at her for a long moment. Then she put one arm around Amara's shoulders and pulled her close in the sideways way she had always done, chin resting on the top of Amara's head, the familiar weight of her mother's arm across her back. They stood like that for a while. The kitchen was warm, the dishes soaked in the sink. The city moved outside the window, indifferent and vast and full of rooms where things were happening that had nothing to do with this one. The story ran on Tuesday. The main piece, the follow-up, both pieces, the discrimination pattern at Maison Valère, and the separate story about the attempted suppression, which Dana Ferris and her editors had spent 48 hours deciding how to handle, and had ultimately decided to handle by publishing it clearly, separately, with full context. Amara's name was in it. Her account was quoted at length. The quote about standing in that boutique and not disappearing was the one that traveled furthest, the one that got picked up and passed between people on the platforms where things got passed, the one that appeared in text screenshots with the caption, "She said what she said." Vivian Hale did not respond publicly. Her departure from Maison Valère was confirmed in the corporate statement that ran alongside Dana Ferris's piece, described as a mutual separation, the language of managed exits. Amara did not feel triumph when she read it. She had been right about that, about how it would feel, back when she'd told Jin-tae that justice and revenge were not always the same thing. The feeling was not victory. It was more like the release of a pressure she had not fully realized she was holding until it was gone. A breath she had been taking in shallow increments for years, finally taken all the way down. Compagnie Valon announced an independent external review of its customer experience practices across all North American locations. 3 of the 11 previous complainants were contacted by the company's new crisis management team and offered, in carefully worded language, acknowledgments and settlements. Whether those settlements were enough was a question Amara was not positioned to answer. She suspected they were not. She suspected that enough was a number that kept moving and that the moving of it was the point. The federal investigation into Jin-tae became public the following Thursday, when Brasa filed the complaint he had promised to file. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed the investigation was open and declined to comment further. Jin-tae's lawyers released a statement characterizing the investigation as politically motivated by a foreign business rival and asserting that all transactions in question were documented financial wind-downs of legitimately divested assets. The statement was careful and measured and had clearly been written by people who were very good at their jobs. Amara read the statement. She did not call him. She did not call him for 9 days. On the 9th day, he called her, and she answered, and they talked for 40 minutes. And what they said to each other in those 40 minutes was not the kind of conversation she would have known how to have 7 days earlier or 7 weeks earlier. It was a conversation between 2 people who had seen each other at the worst and most exposed angles, and had not looked away, and were now trying to figure out what that meant, and whether it meant anything at all. "How are you?" he said, which was not a question he asked easily. She could hear the effort of the plainness of it. "Tired," she said, "and not tired, both." "I understand that. I know you do." A pause. "The investigation," he said. "My lawyers believe the characterization will not survive full discovery. The wind-down documentation is thorough. It was thorough because I knew, when I was doing it, that it might need to be." "Good," she said. "It will take time." "Most things do." Another pause. "I owe you an accounting," he said, "of every decision I made that affected you without your knowledge. I know that doesn't undo anything, but I would like to give it to you." She looked out her apartment window, the fire escapes, the lit windows across the alley, the cold, clear February evening. "Not yet," she said, "but yes. Eventually." "I'll wait," he said. "I know you will." She launched the brand in April. It was called Meridian. A name she had been carrying in the back of her mind for 2 years without knowing what it was for. A styling consultancy dedicated explicitly to women who had been told by the industry's measurement systems that they did not fit, and to making visible a different arithmetic of beauty. Not narrower, not lighter, not younger, but more itself, more particular, more honest. She built the website herself over 3 weekends. She wrote the copy in one sitting, late on a Tuesday night, and did not heavily edit it because the first version was the true version, and editing it would have softened things that needed to stay sharp. Her mother was the first model, not because Amara asked her, but because Diane showed up to the brand's photo shoot, a small affair, a friend's studio in Bushwick, natural light, and a borrowed backdrop, wearing the emerald bag over the shoulder of a rust-colored winter coat that Amara had bought her to replace the 7-year-old one with the separating lining, and she stood in front of the camera with the specific dignity of a woman who has spent decades learning how to stand in difficult rooms and has recently been reminded that she does not have to make herself small in them. The photograph ran as the brand's first social media post. It was, by any metric Amara might have used to measure such things, extraordinary. Not because the bag was extraordinary, though the bag was beautiful. Not because the coat was extraordinary, though the rust against her mother's dark skin was a combination that Amara had selected with the precision she brought to everything she chose. It was extraordinary because of the expression on Diane Brooks's face, the open, specific, unself-conscious dignity of a woman who is being seen and knows it and has decided to allow it. The face of a woman who has stopped turning the page. Amara stood behind the camera and looked at her mother and felt something move through her that was not sadness and was not joy and was not pride exactly, but contained all of those things and was larger than any of them individually. The feeling of a circle closing, not neatly, not without scarring, but closing, the loose ends gathered into something that could be held. Later, after the shoot, after the photographer had packed up, and her mother was putting on her coat in the doorway, and they were making plans for the following Sunday, Diane paused with her hand on the emerald bag's strap. "You know what this taught me?" Diane said. "What?" Her mother looked at her with the specific directness she had always had, the look that saw past the performing and the armor and the carefully managed composure. "That wanting something is not weakness," she said. "I always thought it was. Your father tried to tell me otherwise for 30 years, and I mostly didn't listen." She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "I'm listening now." Amara looked at her mother in the doorway of the Bushwick studio with the rust coat and the emerald bag and the late April light coming in sideways through the high windows, and thought about 7 months of $200 at a time and ruined shoes in the rain and a woman behind a counter with a cold smile and a man with dragon tattoos who had stepped forward when no one else did, and all the complicated wreckage and grace that had come after. She thought about what it meant to stand in a room where the room did not want you and to not disappear. She thought about the difference between justice and revenge and whether the line between them was ever as clear as you hoped it would be before you got there. She thought about her father's voice saying, "You have always deserved those things." She thought about a boy of 16 standing next to the woman who raised him in a department store, watching her be erased, walking out without saying a word, and spending the next 20 years becoming the kind of man who would never do that again, even when the cost of not doing it was everything he had built. She thought about the specific loneliness of people who carry things they believe are too complicated to be understood by anyone else, and how that belief, more than anything else, was the thing that kept them carrying it alone. "Me too," Amara said. Her mother smiled at her, the small private one, the one that had been Amara's whole life, and went out into the April afternoon, and the door closed, and the studio was quiet around her, and Amara stood in the leftover light and breathed, all the way in, all the way down, the way she had needed to breathe for a very long time. Outside, the city did what cities do. It kept going. And somewhere in it, a woman walked with an emerald bag on her shoulder and her head up, and no one in her path looked at her and thought about what she cost or what she was worth or whether the color suited her complexion or her figure. They just saw a woman who knew where she was going, which was in the end the only thing that had ever mattered.